Hey everyone, Azim here. We are continuing the cardiovascular system. We're here in chapter 22. We talked about blood previously. Here we're talking about the heart, the organ that pumps blood around your body. So we'll be identifying cardiac muscle. Histology will be important in this chapter. We'll be looking at the pathway that blood takes through the heart. We'll get to the pathway through blood vessels later on. Today we'll focus on pathway of blood through the heart. And we'll be looking at the gross anatomy and then, like I mentioned, histology of the heart. It'll be important to understand what the heart looks like with our own eyes, and also at the tissue level, what kind of structures are present that help the heart do its job of pumping blood rhythmically. We'll get to the conduction system of the heart in the next portion of this chapter. It'll be in probably like the 4th video of this series. A heart is a lot like an engine, and hopefully you have some idea of how an engine works, and if you don't, it's okay. Here's a nice little animation. An engine has a piston, this thing that's moving back and forth. Let me change colors here. This thing that's moving back and forth is a piston, and by moving back and forth, it can suck in fuel, and then it can push it out. So what's happening is as a piston goes up, you're sucking fuel in. As a piston pushes down, you're pushing out the waste. This is pretty much how a heart works. When our hearts pump, we fill up our heart with blood, then we pump it out. We fill up our heart with blood, and then we pump it out. And some blood is well oxygenated, and then some blood is poorly oxygenated. That contains the waste of carbon dioxide that we need to get rid of. So we'll look at how our heart pumps, much like an engine, to bring in blood that needs to be oxygenated, and then pumping blood that has already been oxygenated to the rest of the body, because we want to circulate oxygen and nutrients and get rid of wastes. Brief intro to the whole cardiovascular system. We've been talking about blood, but with all of them, all the parts together. In humans, it's a closed loop. You can talk more if you get to Gen Bio about the different types of circulatory systems. It's pretty cool. But what I mean here by a closed loop is that normally all the blood in your body is contained within blood vessels or within the heart. It is not normally leaking out of the heart. It is not normally leaking out of blood vessels. If you have a cut blood vessel, that's when you bleed out, and that's not good. But normally it's within all these blood vessels. We have the heart that's pumping blood, circulating blood throughout your body. The heart is divided into 2 halves. If I draw a simplified version over here on the side, this dividing half that I just drew, there's a wall separating the left half of the heart from the right half of the heart. The term for wall is septum. There's a septum dividing the left and right halves. And we've seen a septum before, like septum pellucidum in the brain, or the nasal septum. Septum just means wall, a dividing part. That wall, that dividing part of the heart, will be really important to keep deoxygenated blood and well oxygenated blood separate. And we represent oxygen poor blood here in blue and oxygen rich blood here in red. You have the heart, you have blood vessels. There are 3 basic kinds of blood vessels. It actually gets more complicated than this, and we're going to learn about the different types in the next chapter. But 3 basic blood vessel types. There are veins. The definition of a vein, the definition of any of these blood vessels is not about what it's carrying, it's about where it's carrying the blood. Veins carry blood to the heart. So, for example, a vein would be this one right here, because blood is going to the heart. It happens to be carrying oxygen poor blood. This one right here is also carrying blood to the heart. It happens to be carrying oxygen-rich blood. So it's not about oxygen content of the blood, it's about the direction of flow. Veins carry blood to the heart. Compare that with arteries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So here you can see oxygen-rich blood being carried away from the heart in order to nourish tissues. But we can also have arteries that can carry blood away from the heart and it's poorly oxygenated. In this case, it's carrying blood to the lungs, which makes sense because we want to carry blood to the lungs so that we can get oxygen. The third blood vessel type are capillaries. Capillaries are small, branched, in order to maximize surface area, maximize diffusion, small branched blood vessels for gas exchange, nutrient exchange, waste exchange. We have capillaries in the lungs so that you can exchange gases. We have capillaries in every other tissue of your body. There's capillaries everywhere. This is a very, very simplified drawing. In order to exchange gases, to get oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide, to get nutrients, to get rid of wastes. And of course, filling up these blood vessels is blood. We talked about blood in the last chapter, how it has erythrocytes, leukocytes, platelets, bunch of nutrients, wastes. It's just a medium for carrying stuff from one point to another. We're complex multicellular organisms. We need some way to transport stuff around within our bodies. And here's a solution. I said that there was a septum. Let me redraw that septum in black. There is the septum. Now, because the heart is divided into two halves, we are able to separate poorly oxygenated blood from richly oxygenated blood. The side of, or let me put it this way, since there are two sides of the heart, we can make two different circuits. When I say circuit means like a full circle. In this case, a circuit is starting in one part of the heart and ending in another part of the heart. It's not going to be the same part, but we are going from one part of the heart to somewhere else, back to another part of the heart. So let's look at the pulmonary circuit first. Pulmonary implies lungs. So the pulmonary circuit starts on the right side of the heart. It goes out of the heart to the lungs. So here we are in the lungs. We exchange gases. We're getting rid of carbon dioxide, bringing in oxygen. And then we're bringing that oxygen-rich blood to the left side of the heart. That would be the pulmonary circuit. You start with oxygen-poor blood, go to the lungs, bring in oxygen to the blood. It binds to hemoglobin inside of erythrocytes. So you start on the right side and on the left side. And to be clear, we're looking at anatomical position. So this is the right side. This is the left side. For the systemic circuit, we're starting in the right side. The left side. We're starting on the left side, pumping blood out of the heart to the rest of the body, exchanging blood at other places in the body. The word systemic means throughout the whole body, except the lungs. So it could be going to the liver, it could be going to the brain, it could be going to a muscle in your leg. Any of those things are part of the systemic circulation, just everywhere except the lungs. And then we return that poorly oxygenated blood back to the right side of the heart. So we start on the left side and on the right side. And then we repeat. So really, when we pump blood throughout our body, it's kind of like making a figure eight. Not quite a figure eight, but you go out of the body, come back, go out of the heart and come back, go out of the heart and come back. And then you just keep going. Now, of course, this drawing is very simplified. We're going to see more and more complexity here as we look at what blood vessels we can use, and we'll be doing that in the next chapter. Simplified view of each circuit. The right atrium, whoops. The right atrium is this top chamber of the heart right here. That's the right atrium. Let me draw a simplified view here. These are valves, these little lines I'm drawing. You'll learn about them in a minute, but this is the right atrium. From the right atrium, we pump blood to the right ventricle. The right ventricle is below it, inferior. That'll be number 2. The blood vessel that exits from the right ventricle towards the lungs is the pulmonary trunk. That's right here. Pulmonary trunk is a type of artery because we're pumping blood away from the heart. The word trunk just means short and wide. And it immediately branches. It branches to pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary arteries go to the lungs, and they branch further, and eventually they branch into capillaries, pulmonary capillaries. And this is where we get gas exchange. Carbon dioxide leaves into the lungs, oxygen that we've breathed in come into the blood, facilitated by thin simple squamous alveoli and thin simple squamous cells of capillaries. We take that oxygenated blood and bring it back towards the heart. Remember, the term for a blood vessel that's coming back to the heart is a vein. So there are pulmonary veins returning blood to the heart. And then we end at the left atrium. On our drawing at the top here, there's a left atrium, and then there's also a left ventricle. So there are 4 chambers of the heart. Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, separated by that septum. So our systemic circuit to the rest of the body, we start in the left atrium. We pump blood to the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, we pump blood out of the heart. The first major artery out of the heart on this side, the left side, is the aorta. It's the largest artery in your body. The aorta then can branch. Some branches to the head, some branches to the arms, to the trunk, to the legs. There's lots of branches. We're just going to collectively call them systemic arteries. Again, this is a very, very simplified drawing of what's going on in the body. Wherever we go, arteries will eventually branch into capillaries, and capillaries are where we exchange gases and nutrients. We deliver oxygen and take up carbon dioxide. So now we have oxygen poor blood, rich in high carbon dioxide. We return blood, we return blood back through veins, systemic veins. And then there's actually 2 major veins leading back to the heart. There's a superior vena cava and an inferior vena cava, plural vena cavae. Superior vena cava takes blood from the head and arms back to the heart. Inferior vena cava delivers blood from everywhere else, basically everything below the heart, back to your heart. You finally end up back at the right atrium. And that's our full circuit. More about the heart specifically. That was circuit, and we'll look at more of that when we get to blood vessels, and we'll see those blood vessels that we mentioned here in a second. But to protect the heart, we've seen this before. If you remember back in chapter 1, I believe, really early, we learned that the heart is covered by membrane. Specifically, it's covered by both a fibrous and a serous membrane. Take a look at the right side here, this diagram here on the right side. The fibrous pericardium is the outermost, tougher protective layer. You can see in this cadaver, cut open cadaver, there's a very thick covering that's been cut to make a window. That's the fibrous pericardium. Deeper to that, there is a serous pericardium, and there's 2 layers of serous pericardium. There is parietal serous pericardium, a parietal layer, and then a visceral layer. In between the parietal and visceral layers, you have fluid. And that fluid, that's what the serous fluid is, where it's found, and what lubricates the heart as it's beating. So the fibrous pericardium is the tougher protection. The serous pericardium is to provide that lubrication. You have the pericardial serous fluid to lubricate and reduce friction. If I were to draw a simplified view of this on the bottom right, let's say we have our heart right here. Actually, let me make this a different color. All right, here's the muscle of the heart in this color. And the muscle of heart, that's myocardium. Surrounding the very, very outside is the fibrous pericardium. This is not to scale. Fibrous pericardium. And then surrounding that, you've got parietal pericardium. Then you have directly against the heart, you have the visceral pericardium. And then in between, you have the serous fluid. Then you have the heart itself. Oh, let me back up. Visceral pericardium is also known as epicardium, because in between the epicardium and the endocardium, you have the muscle. So there's one more layer that's lining the internal part, because the heart has space inside so that blood can fill it up and can be squeezed. The inner lining of the chambers is called endocardium. It's simple squamous endothelial tissue. Myocardium is in the middle. It's the muscle of the heart, the cardiac muscle, and as well as connective tissue, blood vessels, and nerves that serve it. If you take a look at this diagram right here, it's showing a blow up of that. We have our endocardium, this layer right here. We have the myocardium, where we have those branched cardiac muscle cells. We've got our epicardium or visceral pericardium right here. The pericardial cavity is where you have that fluid. And then surrounding that, you have your parietal pericardium. Not shown would be the fibrous, so I'll just draw fibrous outside of all that. So several layers several layers that are protecting the heart, both outside and internally. Myocardium is, functionally the most important part here. It's the one that actually causes contraction. Most of it is made of cardiac contractile cells. We've seen these before. We briefly went over it when we first introduced the other muscle types, especially skeletal muscle. But cardiac contractile cells, if you look closely at this histology, you can see that they are not that long. I mean, they're longer than they are wide, but they have striations, that banding pattern that runs perpendicular to the length of the cell. They have striations. And because they have striations, they can generate a decent amount of force. They use that same mechanism that we discussed, the sliding filament mechanism that we discussed when we talked about skeletal muscle. Same basic process. Small differences that you'll learn in physio, but same basic process. It's very dependent on aerobic respiration. They need oxygen constantly. So they have tons of mitochondria. They use up a lot of oxygen, which means there are blood vessels that lead to the heart. They don't use the blood that goes within the chambers. They need blood delivered more directly to the myocardium. And we'll talk about the coronary circulatory system, which is part of the systemic circulatory system. These cardiac contractile cells are linked at these special junctions. These special junctions are called intercalated discs. Intercalated discs at these junctions, between cells, we have gap junctions, and gap junctions let ions flow from one cell to another. By having ion flow, you can get rhythmic contraction because electricity leads to physical contraction. We also have desmosomes, and desmosomes tightly link cells together so that when one cell moves, it's going to pull the other cell with it. Both of these things, both gap junctions and desmosomes, ensure that there is rhythmicity, both electrical rhythmicity and physical rhythmicity when these muscles contract. And having rhythmicity for your heart is really important, as we're going to see. Much more important than skeletal muscle and smooth muscle. Not to say that it's not important for those, but you need your heart to be rhythmic all the time. Any kind of arrhythmicity will mess up flow, ruin how much oxygen can get to a certain place, and that leads to huge problems. Can lead to things like stroke, for instance. That's the first part of chapter 22. In the next video, we'll go over more of the heart, gross anatomy. So yeah, please let me know if any questions. Take a look at the histology videos for cardiac muscle that we've seen previously. And I'll see you in the next video.